introducing my very dear friend, Ivor Ridley, to facilitate a welcome to country for PDU. Give him a round of applause, everyone.
Guy, Wallawani, Jindawan, Gadigal Eora. Today, I welcome you to the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and I respect any Aboriginal people here, past and present. Thank you. So, let me test everyone's knowledge on their Aboriginal skills. Alright, does anyone know what this is? Okay, does anyone know the actual name for this instrument? This isn't the didgeridoo. Yidaki, cool. Give a round of applause. Right, so the reason why most people think this song, this is called the didgeridoo, is because when the invaders first came down, they had this song being played. You hear it? So it's actually the didgeridoo song. So the real name for this is actually called Yidaki. Can everyone say Yidaki? Yidaki. Yidaki, that's very good. All right, how well do you guys know your Aboriginal personality? Well, very well? Okay, all right, well, we'll find out now. All right, so I'm going to play a sound cue on the Yidaki, and then you guys are going to tell me what animal it is. All right, you ready? Does anyone know that? Right, you got it. Right, here's another one. Cool, you guys are good, right. Yeah. I'll do it again. Yes, cool. Alright, now, I'm going to play some sounds that are man-made, and you guys can guess it. Alright. Here's another one. Qantas, the flying kangaroo. Alright. How many of you guys have heard of rubber-proof fence? Yeah. So the rubber-proof fence is a fence that goes along Western Australia, and it's built to stop the rabbits from climbing over and repopulating. So this is the story of the three kangaroos. There's the father kangaroo, the mother kangaroo, and the baby Joey. And they're hopping away, and a dingo starts chasing them. And the only way they can get to safety is if they hop over this rubber-proof fence. So first, you see the father jump over the rubber-proof fence, then you see the mother jump over the rubber-proof fence, and then at the end, the Joey's struggling to get over. And he tries once, he tries twice, and finally he gets over the rubber-proof fence. And at the end, you can hear the kookaburra laughing at the dingo because he didn't get any dinner. Who wants to come up? So if no one volunteers, I have to randomly pick people. All right, move, come.
It's always me. That doesn't hold still. Yes, I'm falling everywhere today.
All right, now we're gonna do the emu dance. So, right? Because there's no female volunteers, I'll show you. So normally the female emu, it goes like this, and wherever the emu head looks, your head looks, and you point your toes and you walk. And then there'll be a horn noise, and when the horn sounds, you have to shake your leg. And the reason for you shake your leg is because you're looking for a male. Someone could be the female kangaroo, and someone could be the male. The male kangaroo, and stand and put your hand behind your back. And when the horn goes, you have to run up to him and shake the leg. Alright?
Everybody can put their phones to silent at this point. It'll be perfect. Thanks so much. And I'll do the same. Hello everybody, welcome to a very special event. I'd like to begin by thanking each and every person in this room for helping to bring about this experience I'm so excited to share it with you today. Thanks also to the Petersham Masonic Lodge for lending us the use of the Egyptian room for this talk. I can't think of a more appropriate venue for what we're going to hear today. Extra special thanks to Judah Jen and the Happy Heart Shop in Newtown for a large book purchase. To Michael from Camperdown Sound for organising screens, recording equipment. Round of applause for Michael, everyone, please. So it's now 12 p.m. 2 p.m. we're going to break for 15-minute intermission to allow bathroom, tea, coffee, smoke break, whatever you need. And we're going to come back at 2:15 for a Q&A panel with our speaker, Peter Newman, panel members from the Australian Psychedelic Society, Sydney, Jeff Baker, Colin Hawkshaw, and also a special guest, Darpan. Today, we're going to hear P.D. Newman, one of my favourite authors, speak about a range of interesting subjects from the ancient use of entheogenic acacia to possibly astrological megalithic sites and the very philosopher's stone itself. Since his first article, Acacia, the Sprig of Immortality, was published in 2013, Newman's written prolifically on many esoteric subjects, mainly concerning entheogen use in the Western magical traditions. His work has been published in Ethnomycological Journals, Sacred Mushroom Studies, Invisible College, Dragibus, Transactions of the Mississippi Lodge of Research, the Scottish Rite Journal, and many others. It's also been published on numerous websites. You may have seen his interviews on various podcasts as well. So, how did I get interested in Newman's work? I'll come right out and I'll say it. I had a flash of inspiration that a processed form of acacia is the philosopher's stone after a particularly powerful experience myself. Acacia extracts can give you unbelievable, even spiritual visions and a taste of what it means to be unconstrained by your own body. Modern research into the effects of tryptamines on the health of the brain can show that it rejuvenates neuronal connections thanks to nerve growth factor and, in a sense, can keep you young. My good friend Ethan, in the audience today, has anecdotally attributed significant healing effects to its use. My experiences with extracts of acacia have been so visceral, they led me to contemplate the independent existence of the soul from the body. And with that comes the idea of immortality. So here the connections to the philosopher's stone become clear. I've written way too much here. Without further ado, let's get P.D. Newman up here and let him do the real work. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Khalil. Everyone, go ahead and give Khalil a round of applause. I can't tell you how impressed I've been with his performance. And also for Ivo for that amazing opening. Thank you so much.
One sec.
Everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
There we go. We're good.
So, we're going to talk about alchemy today. And for those of you who don't know what alchemy is, it's a science, it's an art that, for the most part, is surrounded by misconceptions in modern day. When people hear alchemy, they think of transmutation of base metals into gold. And this is a metaphor, a trope that communicates alchemical truths, but that's not what alchemy is about. Before we get into the actual topic of alchemy, we're going to do a short prelude and talk about fallen angels. Because as we're going to see, this notion of alchemy is inseparable from fallen angels. Now, you're all familiar with the scene in the Bible where the sons of God come and take the daughters of men. They see they're fair, and they take them as wives. And it says, the angels who did not keep their positions of authority, but abandoned their proper dwelling, saw the daughters of men that they were fair. And they took them wives of all which they chose. This exasperates the flood motif, the idea that when these angels bred with these women, they taught them things that man was not supposed to know. And these things that they taught them were specifically the province of these angels, and according to the founders of alchemy, these angels use this teaching to control men, to control our fates. And so, when God decides to destroy the world for this transgression, Enoch, the seventh descendant from Adam, gives a prophecy about this. He says, "See, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to judge everyone, and to convict all of them of all the ungodly acts they have committed in their ungodliness." Now, when Enoch is introduced in the book of Genesis, it's only a couple of verses. He doesn't have any lines. He doesn't, much less a prophecy like this that's quoted later in the book. So where does this come from? It actually comes from a series of books that were lost for a long time and rediscovered in Ethiopia, in a monastery in Ethiopia. And they were brought back and translated in 1773. And in this, in the first book of it, which is called the Book of the Watchers, we read where this prophecy comes from. "And the fallen angels took themselves wives, and they taught them charms, and made them acquainted with plants. And they taught men metallurgy, and all coloring tinctures, enchantments, and root cuttings, antidotes, astrology, the constellations, knowledge of meteorology, geomancy, the signs of the sun, and the course of the moon." Now, if you're familiar at all with alchemy, you know that all of these things are used in alchemy, down to the timings, down to the metaphors with the metals. And this is what they taught them. This is this forbidden wisdom. And this brings us to the topic of alchemy proper. So alchemy begins in Egypt. Hence the name alchemy, alchemia, which is named after the black soil that surrounds the Nile. When the Nile used to overflow, it doesn't anymore, but it used to overflow annually. And this would bring rich silt all to areas inland. And without that, there would be no life in this region. That was the bloodline of every Egyptian. And I put this up here to show you how this is a stela, which would be put in tombs. This is a stela of a pharaoh. But we can see how even in alchemical texts, they're borrowing from these symbols. They're very much basing it on these death motifs in Egypt, and we're about to see why. So the first alchemist, the first person to use the term alchemy, is this man Zosimus of Pontus. One of the most fascinating figures you will ever hear about. He is a Gnostic hermetist, so he's a Christian, and he has this idea about fallen angels that was very similar to what we just saw with Christianity. Now, his job was that he was a metallurgist, and he would make statues. He didn't just make any statues, he made something we would call animated statues, and we'll get more into that in just a moment. Most importantly, he was the student of a woman named Maria Prophetissima, or Maria the Prophetess, who is claimed to be the first alchemist. We only know about her from his writings, but he claims he got all this from her. Now this, I think, is significant, because rarely do we hear about these traditions that literally fuel the Western mystery traditions, and it was given by a female. I think that's pretty empowering. Now, this is a statue of Hecate, goddess Hecate. I put this up here because when we talk about animated statues, Hecate's statue was animated by a Neoplatonist named Proclus. He could make it talk, smile, and torches light up above her head. But this is what Zosmos did. He didn't just make statues, he made animated statues. And when we say animated, I don't mean mechanical contrivances. It wasn't a robot. And animated as in instilled with anima or soul. These are ensouled statues that are put together by combining plants, metals, different things that have what we call signatures for whatever deity they're trying to capture in this statue. And that's what he did. He made these statues and animated them for people. But he did it outside of the Egyptian priesthood. He didn't trust the Egyptian priests. So he ascribed to the same notion of fallen angels. He says in a letter to one of his students, "It is stated in the Holy Scriptures that there exists a race of daemons who have commerce with women. Hermes made mention of them. Certain angels lusted for women, and descending from the heavens, they taught them all the arts of nature. On account of this, they now live outside heaven, because they taught men all the evil arts which are of no advantage to the soul." Now, this notion of being of no advantage to the soul, clearly it is. Alchemy is advantageous to man's soul. But they don't want man knowing in this scenario, in this teaching. Now, he's telling this to a student. Her name is Theosebia. And the student that he has, he's taken her under his wing, and he's really trying to teach her everything he knows without saying it too clearly, because that's how alchemy works. You don't just hand it to the student. You give them allegories and metaphors, and they have to solve these problems themselves. And the benefit of this is that they make the discoveries themselves. We're rarely appreciative of something we're handed. But if you have to work for it and you make the discovery on your own, it actually makes a difference in your life. And he knew this. Now, Theosebia, she had been learning from the priesthood. And these priests were teaching her astrology. And we'll see in a moment, Zosmos doesn't like astrology. Now, recall just a moment ago, he said Hermes makes mention of this. Hermes is a Greco-Egyptian deity that he's the messenger of the gods, but by the time we get to Hermeticism in Alexandria, he becomes sort of a Christ-like figure for them. He's I wouldn't say a god, but their patron. We could say their patron, because these people had many gods, but he was specifically their patron. And in one of his texts, specifically a book called Asclepius, which is the oldest of the Hermetic texts, even though it survived only in Latin, but it predates the Greek texts we have. Hermes says, "How mournful when the gods withdrew from mankind, only the baleful angels remained to mingle with humans, seizing the wretches and driving them to all that is contrary to the nature of souls." There that is again, contrary to the nature of souls. Why do they think that? So Zosmos, like I said, he makes statues. But statuary, this making of statues for ensoulment, is very similar to the alchemical process of producing this stone that is also said to be ensouled, to have anima in it. This is a picture of his equipment from one of his manuscripts, which I put this up here because I want it to be clear, he was a laboratory alchemist. This isn't an internal process. He's saying, you're going to meditate and breathe. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but that's not the way he's thinking. This is a physical process to make a physical substance that can cause a change in your soul. So this is his student, Theosebia. She came to represent the moon, and he came to represent the sun in later manuscripts. You can see why, because they're placed over their heads. But when we get further into the alchemical tradition, you see in these manuscripts constantly paired the lunar queen and the solar king, Rex et Regina, the king and the queen, gold and silver. And he's telling her, she says, she doesn't know, he's teaching her this stuff basically about metallurgy, using the metallurgical language. And she says, I don't understand. Well, what does this have to do with my soul? And he tries to explain it. He says to her, And this is in a book he calls the Book of Pictures, Mushaf Asubar. He's saying, I'm going to make it so clear to you, I'm going to draw you pictures instead of just telling you teachings. And if he hadn't done this, alchemy probably would not survive today. And it's these pictures that are repeatedly reworked and recast in different alchemical manuscripts on up until it reaches Europe. He says, if you dissolve the body together with the mercury by the acacia and continue to cook the whole, the body will die. This is what the sages spoke of when they said, it is white in outer appearance and red in essence. Now he says this to her after he had taught her about something called cinnabar. Cinnabar is a mineral. It's composed of mercury and sulfur. In the earliest alchemical teachings we know of, it wasn't called alchemy. It was called Neidong and Weidong. These are Chinese alchemical techniques, what they call Chinese cave alchemy. They would use cinnabar to teach cosmology because from that one mineral, they produced two, the sulfur and the mercury. So the Chinese adepts were teaching a cosmology. How this many things comes from one thing. Zawson countered that. He must have heard this somewhere because he used that same terminology. He borrowed that, but he pulled a Nietzschean transvaluation on it and completely flip-flopped what it means. So he's telling her that this cinnabar, when I say cinnabar, I mean acacia. But they said mercury from cinnabar in order to disguise it from those who wanted to enter this work. The sages described their work with any one of the crafts similar to it in order to cover it. Therefore, we have also named it lead from copper. So you see what he's done. He's taking this red wood. The acacia he had access to was red roots. And he's using a cinnabar, which already exists, an ancient tradition of using this in an alchemical way. And he adds copper, the red metal. And he's saying, it's this substance we're getting from these. When I say cinnabar, when I say copper, I mean it's this acacia. And when I say mercury or lead, I mean it's the byproduct of this acacia. This is what cinnabar looks like in its natural state. And from cinnabar is produced a pigment, which we know as vermilion. And when you produce vermilion, the byproducts are, like I said, the sulfur and mercury. So from this one, you really get three things. But vermilion, you're going to see, is significant because even to this day, acacia is used to dye. The red notes are used to give red hues to carpets and textiles. And indeed, Baphomet even calls the teacher, he calls it Baphe, which means to baptize, but it also means to teacher with color. This is a picture of acacia root bark, which is, when you can see when it's been processed, it looks very similar to that vermilion pigment. And this is what he was seeing. When he looked at it, he thought, wow, that's really similar to cinnabar. And that's probably why he started adopting that language. How he got the language, we don't know. So this is one of the main pictures. You recognize this from the red shirt Khalil had made up. This is from Mushaf Asubar. And this is him showing the tree. This is the cinnabar here. If you look at the top, we have the leaves are in the same structure, bipinnate compound structure, and sometimes compound structure. And y'all have so many acacias here, they don't all meet that criteria. A lot of y'all don't have that structure, but the ones they had access to did. And you see he's colored these leaves in the same colors of the alchemical work. The black represents the initial stage of the work called negredo, and what it signifies is the matter in its crude state in the earth, in the dark earth. The middle one, the white signifies the process of purification, of removing anything from that that is superfluous other than the stone you're trying to produce. And the red signifies the reddening, the final morning sun, the way some alchemists put it. And that's both the aged tincture and it's also the result of its application, putting it in your blood, so to speak. And you see, with his left hand, he's pointing directly at the roots of the tree. He's saying, this is where it is. You have to get it from this spot. And the other figure is admiring the thorns. They look similar to the leaves, but I interpret those to be thorns. And in fact, acacia, whenever Dioscorides, Greek physician, when he named the acacia, Acacia, he named it after its most defining characteristic, which are those thorns. Acacia means thorn. Here's some good examples of these thorns. The top left is Acacia americana, also known as Glitizia triacanthos. That's what we get in the United States, and it's actually what evidence is showing the Native Americans were using in combination with something called passion flower, which is a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. So, and these were found, if they were found alone, it wouldn't mean that much, because we don't have proof they were combining them, but they were found with datura, with black nightshade, they were found with tobacco and St. John's wort and opium lettuce, all drugs, with these two specific. The top right is one of the year species that grows around here. Khalil can tell you, I think, where it grows. And the bottom left one is an African acacia, and the thorns, it doesn't do it justice here, they're enormous. So remember I said that this Mushaf Asubar, if this hadn't survived, we probably wouldn't know what alchemy was, outside of a few references in some texts, and that's not enough to really rebuild a science. But just to show you how influential this was, I'm going to show you throughout several hundred years different alchemical manuscripts. So here you can see we still have the alchemical tree. We have him, he's leaning his axe on the roots. An axe, he's giving you an indication of what you need to do to chop this thing. Take it down and get the medicine out of it. And these planets at the top, they represent alchemical processes, different stages of the work. But we're going to see them take on all kinds of different characteristics. Here we have now the sun and the moon have both migrated to the same side, and the other one represents the two faces. That's Mercury. Mercury is the two-faced deity. And again, he's added water to the base as is to say we have to submerge these roots in a menstruum. We got to get it wet. Got to get it into some kind of a fluid. They don't tell us what kind of fluid yet, but we'll get to that. Now this is Moses on the left. We know because he has horns or thorns. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And on the right is a satyr or Pan. Pan represents panic. Pan was the god of isolated places. He's the feeling you have when you get out, when you've gone for a walk and weren't paying attention, and you don't know where the hell you are. That's Pan greeting you. And you see in the trees, up in the branches of the tree, we have these birds, pelicans feeding their young from their breast, which has heavy alchemical significance. We're already going to be in a 2-hour talk, so I can't go into each of them, but the pelican shows up repeatedly in something we call the Rose-Croix degrees in Freemasonry. Now here, the king is being held against the tree, and so the sun, in a way, is being identified with the tree here. He's no longer pointing at the roots, but the man holding him there, see, he has a caduceus wand instead of an axe, but again, he's indicating these roots. And we have our bird that looks like he's turned into a chicken now, but I think it's actually what's called a hoopoe bird. Hoopoe bird will show up. We'll see that shows up in Egyptian and in Hebrew iconography. Now, notice the roots have a crown around them. So the sun, the crown is a symbol of the solar year, that golden circle. So the king that was being held against that tree is now the tree, but specifically the roots. Now we see these birds flying. In the literature, the birds flying represent volatility. They represent the substance that you have to put the stone in to get it to move and change, do something else. So when you see the birds flying, in alchemical manuscripts, this means subject to fly. It's capable of transmutation. And he's discussing the tree, pointing at the tree here, and he's specifically interested in that volatility. Again, the crown is even more emphasized. The birds are even more active. This one I really like because we start seeing the motif of dismemberment creep in. We're going to see dismemberment is inseparable from the alchemical process. And if you know anything about shamanic dismemberment, you'll know how powerful of a motif this is. You see, both of them are injured to a degree. And again, he's focusing on these roots. Now the birds, instead of just being volatile, they've now assumed the positions that were once the symbols of those planets, specifically showing us the stages of the work, telling the end being the resurrection of the stone, how to produce this. Now we see he's completely lost his arm. He's got, and the other man has lost his leg, and he's leaning on the roots with his peg leg here. But watering the tree, again, showing us you have to water it. It has to be covered in moisture. And specifically this solar tree, which again, we talked about signatures. They saw the acacia as a signature of the sun god. In this one, he's got a shovel here to say, no, you got to, an axe won't do. You really need a shovel. You're going to have to dig. Now, the dismemberment motif is significant because the acacia, the Zosimus didn't just come up with this in a vacuum. The acacia is an extremely important tree and symbol in Egyptian iconography, and Egyptian art, and Egyptian religion. Osiris is the god of fertility. He's the god of death. He's often thought of as the sun god, but he's not a sun god. He's a god of the underworld. He's where the sun goes when we can't see it. Now, I put this here to show in the Egyptian religion, it originally was only pharaohs. A pharaoh would be mummified as a symbol of Osiris, and that would allow them to attain immortality. Now, eventually, this was extended to nobility, and the pharaoh would start extending this to his family and the men who worked for him. But the instructions on what to do when you die were written inside the pyramids. They called them pyramid texts. So when the soul, the Ba soul, got out, which we see the Ba soul as these birds with human faces up here. When the Ba soul gets out, he would read on the pyramid text where to go. Now, by the time these tombs started being raided, common folks began learning these secrets that previously only pharaohs knew. And they would start putting it in their coffins, hiding it on the inside, painting it on the inside of these coffins. And at this time is when they become called coffin texts. And it's from those coffin texts that we get the books of the dead, like the Book of Ani, the Book of Coming Forth by Day. But it starts in these tombs. But by that point, everybody, not just the pharaoh, everybody is prepared as Osiris when they die. Even women, and I put this here to show this is a female that's being prepared, but she has a beard because she's being made to represent Osiris. Everyone did, regardless of sex. On the forehead is a lotus flower, which symbolizes rebirth, and on the top is a mound, the first mound that rose up that is the prototype for pyramids, basically. So this tells us a little about Osiris, lord of vegetation, fertility. He was the husband of Isis and Set, or Apophis. Now Set was older. He came out first. And so in Egyptian culture, that means he gets the choice of Isis. That's his wife. But Isis chose Osiris, and this really pissed Seth off. And he ends up tricking him. And there are lots of different ways this myth manifests, but one of the most popular is Seth throws a wedding party, and he tells Osiris, he says, I have made a box. It's the exact dimensions of your body. And he says, well, that's impossible. I'm a god. You can't mimic me with matter. And he said, well, climb in the box and see. I'll show you. And he had made this box out of acacia. And when Osiris climbs in, he nails the top on, and we see it's a coffin. And he throws this coffin into the Nile. Eventually, it washes up on the shore into the roots of another acacia tree. And this acacia grows and encapsulates it. And Seth gets word, here it is, it's stuck in this tree. Once the god gets out of the tree, think about that, the god is in the tree. But once he gets out, he knows he's done for. So he goes down and he chops that tree down, chops it up into little pieces, and throws them into the Nile. Just like we saw with those roots, they have to be submerged in water. But he throws Osiris into the water, into the Nile. Isis, eventually, with magical help from Tahuti, the god of wisdom, she's able to find all of those pieces and resurrect him, but she can't find his phallus. And she ends up making one out of acacia and magically consorts with him and conceives Horus. The phallus was eaten by a fish, but it's the part of the god that remains in the water once we've taken out the matter, the stone, the generative part of the deity. Now this we can see right up here. This was originally a myth called Bastet and Apep. Bastet is a lion goddess, and she chases Apep into an acacia and slays him, and the blood runs down the tree. Now later, this myth was subsumed by the Osiris cult, and it was no longer Bastet, a cat, it became a mongoose. And if you're familiar with Greek religion, there's an identical teaching where Dionysius becomes a mongoose. But that's what this represents, Osiris killing Set in the tree. So the myth is reversed. And the Egyptians, they weren't like us. They didn't need to draw lines in the sand and say, this is that god, this is that god. Their thinking was very fluid. They understood that all gods are one god. And these myths can get messy, but they had no problem with that. Now here's a good picture. This is a very famous Egyptian piece of art that it gets made into carpets, it gets made into tapestries. But what these are the Egyptian gods represented as birds. And here we have the falcon for Horus. And this down here to the left is a hoopoe. Now pay attention to that long, sharp beak that he has, that thorn-like beak. This hoopoe bird even shows up in Judaism and in Freemasonry. He has to do with a little worm called a shamir worm that is able to eat through anything. But that's a later addition. Right now, he's just a bird with a thorn-like beak that likes to hang out in the acacias. There you go. Now this is another famous piece. This is an acacia behind them, and they're harvesting fruit from it. Now the fruit, if you look closely, is an abbreviated version of the hieroglyph for Osiris. They're eating Osiris as fruit out of this tree, the tree he was encapsulated in. That's the hieroglyph. Now here's another angle. Actually, this had a pointer on it. So up here, we can see these hieroglyphs here. See that triangle? That's the hieroglyph for thorn. Every time you see an acacia, you see that hieroglyph. It represents the acacia. The same way Dioscorides said thorn, we see this. Now they would bake cakes in this shape. They call them mufuku bread. There's several different spellings, but the most common you'll see is mufuku. And they would keep it in a box of acacia that had holes on each side that they would carry around during this Osirian festival. And the common folks, they would bake bread, these red cakes in the shape of body parts. And they would assemble Osiris. They would go all over, they'd hide them all over the land. And the kids would go and find the body parts and they'd put Osiris back together and then they'd eat it at a big feast. But the priests didn't do this. The priests only ate it in the form of this mufuku bread. We'll see why in a moment. Now this, according to archaeologists, this is an incense spoon. But you can see there are fumes placed next to his nose, coming out the end, and a tiny morsel that he's placing inside there. It's been argued that this is something like a peace pipe, like a Native American peace pipe. I don't think that's what it is. I think it probably is an incense spoon, but it's specifically made to be able to put it under your nose and breathe what's coming off of it. And what's this up here at the top? That's that thorn that we always see associated with acacia. All right. So remember, we just saw Moses next to this tree with horns. Does anybody know why Moses has horns?
Age of Aries.
What?
The age of Aries.
Say that one more time.
The age of Aries.
Oh, that's a good, really good guess. Really good, actually. I didn't even think about that. So when Moses came down from the mountain, and in the translations of the Bible we have, it says that his face shone with light. But that's not what it says. You can read in any rabbinical commentary, and it says, no, it's not shone. It says he has horns. Until Christianity became popular enough, and in its notion of the devil being a horned entity, until that became popular enough that this became unacceptable, Moses was almost always depicted with horns. Now this man, he's a professor of psychology at Hebrew University in Israel, Benny Shannon. He wrote a book called The Antipodes of the Mind, Charting the Ayahuasca, the Phenomenology of the Ayahuasca Experience. It's a phenomenal book. But he's less known for a paper he wrote called Biblical Entheogens, a Speculative Hypothesis. And in this, he says that the region where Moses was existing is particularly dense with these acacias. Not only that, in the same region, to this day, they use Paganum harmala seeds as incense. The same markets you would go to buy the Paganum harmala to burn, they call it aspand. To get this aspand, you could pick up acacia gum, acacia, all these different products they would make. They would make muscle relaxants from acacia. So he doesn't have any proof of it. He just says, these are in the same area. They could have been combined. And it really made a huge wave because nobody had thought about it like that before. But he's right. I didn't think he was right. I said, I'm going to prove this guy wrong because that's absurd, and if you can't prove that they were drinking it, why even make a point? But the more I looked, the more I realized he missed some points that corroborate this in a totally different way. So here's another picture of Moses with his horns, praying to deity. So these letters, that's Yod He Vav, which is how you spell the name, is pronounced Yahweh or Jehovah. And this is his vision of the burning bush prior to ascending Mount Sinai. Now the burning bush, again, in our versions of the Bible, that's exactly what it says. He saw a burning bush. It doesn't say that in the Hebrew Bible. The word used for burning is leba. Leba means to shine, or it could mean the tip of a weapon, such as something pointy. And then the word for bush is sena, which literally means an acacia or a rock thorn. A rock thorn is a small acacia like bush tamarisk. Even more interestingly, this is the only time these two words are used anywhere in the Bible. They chose these words just for that verse. So I spoke with a rabbi. I said, where else can I learn about these words? What do they mean? And he said, well, when we run into this problem, we look at the root of the word, and we see what the root means, and that gives us a better idea of what it could mean. So I did that. Leba comes from lebab, which means the soul or the heart. Remember, in soul, animated. Sena, he says, was specifically chosen as a phonetic anagram for Sinai. And he says that according to rabbinical tradition, the burning Sena, the burning bush, is the burning Sinai, the fire on the mountain. It's the same thing happening twice. The mountain where the law was given. Now, the second definition of Sinai, a thorn. So here's the Ark of the Covenant, which was made out of acacia. We spoke about that mufukut's bread and how they would put it in an acacia box, and they would have poles on each side and carry it. You can find hieroglyphs, pictures of carvings of this, of them walking in processions on these holy days, these feast days, carrying this box with Egyptian deities on top instead of cherubim, cherubs. Now, this is what he was instructed to do when he had these visions of spraying this soul acacia. And Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying, and they shall make an ark of acacia wood. Thou shalt make also make a table of acacia wood. And thou shalt make the staves of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. That's significant because those are two signatures that are the same. Acacia and the sun and the gold are both signatures of the sun. And overlay them with gold, that the table might be borne with them. Borne meaning carrying it around. Now, they got a cool box. Now they need a cool place to keep this cool box. And they have to make this the tabernacle in the wilderness, which is conceivably made out of acacia. Thou shalt make the boards of the tabernacle of acacia wood, and bars of acacia wood. And thou shalt hang upon it 4 pillars of acacia wood overlaid with gold. And make the hanging 5 pillars of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. So now he's created this almost tesseract-like structure, acacia structure, out in the middle of nowhere to keep mammon, among other things, which is a type of this mufukut's bread. You have to remember Moses was raised by Egyptian priests. What he's doing is he's taking something that, like we said, was originally reserved for a priesthood, finally found its way to nobility and into the normal common folks. But it didn't make its way to the Hebrews, who were allegedly enslaved at this time. This is what Moses is doing. He's bringing them this priestly knowledge. This is the picture of, so when Moses goes up on the mountain, the first thing that the Israelites do is they come to Aaron and they say, this man's not coming back. He's been up there forever. Let's make something else and we'll worship it. And they make this golden calf, this golden bull. Wait, before we get there, does anybody remember what Moses made them do with the golden bull when he came down and saw them worshiping him?
Drink it.
Drink it. That's right. Why would you drink that?
The end of the age of Taurus.
Then he took the calf which they had made, and heating it, he ground it into a powder, and he scattered it on the water, just like Osiris's body, and made the children of Israel drink it, like it was a punishment. But that's not a punishment. It's almost like we're seeing this notion of the alchemical tincture versus the animated statue. And they're both trying to arrive at the same thing, and I'll tell you why. Plato talked about forms, the Platonic forms. When Hermeticism happened, it was a Platonic universe this stuff was developing in. Animated statues are attempting to arrive at a Platonic form by taking every signature of that form and combining them into an amalgamation. If they can get every piece of the god that's spread around and put it into one thing, there's more of a chance of that god inhabiting that. Well, the alchemists are attempting to do the same thing. They're attempting to arrive at something at the form, but rather by taking one signature and removing everything superfluous from it except for that physical manifestation of the form. and it's almost like we're seeing a battle between these two approaches. So the golden calf is an Egyptian phenomenon. It goes back to the earliest days of Memphis, when this Apis bull, as it was called, was worshipped. Now, even whenever Osiris subsumed this bull and Osiris became the main cult figure in Egypt, he was still known as Apis Osiris after this bull. Apis means honeybee. So it's associated with honeybees. Now, bees, ever since the earliest Greek days, bees are associated with the dead, with intoxication. Sophocles says that the dead move in swarms and make the sound of bees. We talk about getting a buzz when we get high. Carl Ruck says that this probably comes from the connection of what the sound of the bees making, the fact that mead would have been the first naturally fermented alcohol man would have stumbled upon. We call them spirits, right? But so this bull was worshipped for eons before Moses ever made it to Egypt. And so when the Israelites construct this, they weren't, again, doing it in a vacuum. This is a tradition. This, granted, is an artistic depiction, but this is a picture of late Egyptians in Alexandria worshiping the Apis bull on his feast day. Compare this to this artistic depiction of the Israelites worshiping the golden bull. It's almost identical. If you didn't get a long look at these pictures, you might even mistake one for the other. And this brings us to the really fun stuff. We're going to get into European alchemy, and this is where it starts to get, it gets fun because the metaphors really speed up at this point. Now this book, the Turba Philosophorum, it's the oldest alchemical text to show up in Europe. It showed up around 900 AD. And in it, it's a group of philosophers that are arguing about what the philosopher's stone is. These philosophers are Plato, Aristotle, Parmenides, Empedocles, and then Moses. And Moses is the one that steps up and sets them all straight. Now, Moses eventually was confused with Zosimus. And his sister, Moses' sister, Maria, was confused with Zosimus' teacher, Maria Propertissima. That's why we'll also see her called Maria the Jewess, if you research her. Half of the references to her are at Maria the Jewess, but she wasn't Jewish, she's Egyptian. But it's from this confusion of Moses and Zosimus. Why are they confusing them? It's this acacia connection. Moses sets them straight. He says, the envious have named the lead from copper. Remember we saw that with Zosimus, lead from copper. Have named the lead from copper the instruments of formation, meaning the thing we do the stuff with, in order to mislead posterity by deception. I am making it known to them that their instruments of formation are formed from our powder. But of them, no powder is more fit for our work and better for our composition than the powder of acacia, out of which arise suitable instruments of formation. He's saying, what y'all are talking about, you can't even do anything with that. But this has something in it. And this is a picture of Heinrich Kuhnrath in his alchemical lab. And Kuhnrath, he comes along after Edward Kelly and John Dee, who we'll get into in a minute. But I'm going to mention him early because what he says here corroborates this and really nails it home. He says, the white powder is acacia gum. Thus, the red gum is the resin of the wise, a synonym for the transforming substance. Now, all the alchemical sources agree that these red and white substances come from the same source, the same prima materia. He's saying the white one is acacia gum arabic, which is it's a food stuff that's used in making incenses, crafts. But he's saying it's the red gum that is the actual transformative substance. This substance of formation, the way they put it in the Turba. And this is Maria Propertissima. Adam McLean paints these, and he does a terrible job because his colors are all wrong. But this is the best picture of her that I could find. She is who he's quoting. This is where we get this idea of gum, mixing these gums. She says, from the white plant that grows upon the mountain, take white gum and red gum and join them in true marriage, gum with gum. So she's saying we need both of them. Now, this confused me in the beginning because Arabic gum is not psychoactive. I could not figure out why would you need to mix Arabic gum with the red gum. You would get no effect. At this point, I think it probably has something to do with, at this time, glassware was virtually it existed, but it was expensive and rare. How do you stay in possession of a small amount of liquid if you don't have anything but a sheepskin to keep it in? You solidify it. You make it a solid piece. And I think that's what she was doing. Now, when she says, take the white plant that grows on the mountain, in their region, there's only one acacia that I could find that grows in the mountains up there. It's Acacia albida, which means the white acacia. It's also called Faderbia, but it has these, when it's in flower, you can't even see the green. The whole thing is white like snow. This is what she's talking about. This particular one has, I think it's I don't want to tell you wrong. It's got fairly high concentrations of DMT in it. Now I add this here because I want to show you another reason this survived. If it didn't survive with this confusion, we probably wouldn't know who Zosimus was either. Zosimus the hermit was confused with this man, Zosimus the hermit. So we've got a hermetic practitioner, and then we have an actual Christian hermit, both of them named Zosimus. The story that survives about Zosimus, all the Christian authorities that I've checked with, they all say that this story is not about him, that it came from somewhere else and was attached to him. This story, as you're going to see, is a Zosimus story. He gets abducted by this angel, takes him into a cave, and they eat something interesting. He says, I'm looking up into heaven. I saw the face of an angel, and his clothing was as lightning. And giving me his hand, he raised me up and led me to his cave, and we sat under a tree partaking of food. And the water came out from the root of the tree, sweeter than honey, and we drank our fill. For out of the trunks of trees comes water sweeter than honey, and these are our food and drink. I'll show you a picture of them actually consuming water from an acacia tree here. Very famous Egyptian piece. And this is the tradition that if it hadn't found its way into this story about this Orthodox monk, I don't think we would have most of this. And so that brings us to the end of this section, Zosimus and Maria, and really the impact that they've had on future alchemy and what it really means. Because what we're saying is that alchemy, from its earliest inception, was about entheogens. It was about a substance that had the potential to extract your soul from your body. And that's what he told her in the teachings. I didn't need to go into all that, but one of the things he says to his teacher, to his student Theosebia, is that this stone, he says, the stone has the potential, the power to take your soul out of matter, to free you from the fetters of matter. And she says, well, I'm learning from these priests, they're teaching me astrology. He says, no, astrology is what they use to enmesh us further in matter. And she says, but it's propitious astrology. He's teaching you how to do elections, so I know the best time to bet on this or to do that. And he says, it doesn't matter. The minute you base it on astrology, you're getting enmeshed further in fate. He says, but this stone obliterates that. He says, you don't need all of that if you have this. And this brings us to one of the strangest episodes in the history of alchemy, with a man named Edward Kelly and his employer, John Dee. So John Dee was the advisor to Queen Elizabeth. He was an astrologer. doctor, he was a mathematician, he was a cartographer, he was a master at everything he touched. But the thing he was interested in was talking to angels, communicating with angels. And it wasn't because he wanted to have a spiritual experience. He had very base reasons for this. He believed that angels each control their own band of heavens. And wherever they are, above whatever part of the earth, they rule that part of the earth. So he thought, well, if I could get in touch with the angel that rules Germany, I could spy on Germany. That's literally how he was thinking. But he can't make it work. He can't talk to these angels. He at times, he might get a glimpse of them in the stone. He's what he calls a she stone. He might hear something, a phrase, but it's not enough for him to do anything with it. So Queen Elizabeth was sending him scribes, people who could claim that they could stare into crystal balls and talk to or mirrors and talk to angels. He wasn't happy with any of them. He fired them all, one after another, until finally this man came of his own accord, a man named Edward Kelly. Edward Kelly was a character of ill repute already. He had his ears cropped for the crime of coining, which is now a chemical crime. It's passing off adulterated metals as though they're silver or gold. So he was already knee-deep in this alchemical tradition. He shows up and he says, I can do this. And he sits down for Dee. They have this seance-like session, what he calls actions, and he's immediately impressed. Dee is impressed with these angelic apocalypses. He just feeds him one after another. He's giving him all this information on angelic alphabets and how to control different things from distances. Eventually, in the beginning of this, they're using a black onyx stone that actually came from Mexico. It's an Aztec stone that the Aztecs would use when they took mushrooms. They would stare into this black stone. That's what he had, what he was using. They claim that after making contact through Kelly, an angel appeared on their balcony and handed them this other stone, which I believe is it's in a museum in England, I think. But if you're familiar with spiritualism in the 19th century and in around the burned over district in New York, they would have these seances and they would claim that jewels and necklaces would fall out of the sky. This is 300 years before that, but that's what he's saying happened. Now, slowly, he gets information about how to construct this control panel. This is the altar that he used. These are wax seals here that are carved, beeswax, and they have a figure on them called the Sigillum Dei Emet, the sigil of God, the sigil of truth. And this is the alphabet around it, the Enochian alphabet. And each of these have the most surreal, strange writings on them. If you can find your copies, study them, look at them. It's the most schizophrenic looking thing you've ever laid your eyes on. But this is what they did. They placed the crystal ball on top of this, and this allegedly allowed Kelly to talk to them. He saw everything in reverse, so he would have to read it backwards to Dee, and Dee would write it down. And this is a great artistic depiction. I love this because there's a jester over here, but these are these entities that are showing up. The entities, it's pretty clear, they call themselves angels, but when you're reading Dee's diaries, these are very strange entities doing strange things. One of the things they insisted they did was swap wives, which they did. Now, after several years of doing this, Kelly finally opens up to Dee and says, look, I didn't really come to you because I wanted to help you with this scrying stuff. I came to you because I contacted an angel. And this angel gave me this book called the Book of Dunstan. And he told me to bring it to you, that you could tell me how to translate it, and from it we could make more of this red powder. And in fact, it's this red powder that I use to talk to these angels. So he's got this red powder that he's kept secret this whole time. And he says it came from the Archbishop of Canterbury, St. Dunstan. And he later tells another story that some soldiers robbed Dunstan's grave and found these powders. They found two orbs, a white orb and a red orb, ceramic. The white one one of the soldiers threw and it broke, and he noticed white powder that immediately soaked into the wet ground. And he thought, well, I don't know what that is, but if that same stuff is in the red, then maybe I can take it back to town and sell it. He sold it to an innkeeper, who later sold it to Edward Kelly, the orb and the book, the manuscript. So St. Dunstan, this is an artistic depiction of Dee and Kelly talking to what they call spiritual creatures. But this is probably something like this is probably what Kelly claimed was going on with this manuscript. Now, Dunstan is a strange figure anyway. He was a drunk. He liked to pick up prostitutes, and finally he got some kind of an STD and became a monk, a hermit. And he was like, I'm done. And he went and hid out in this little cell in the ruins of Glastonbury. And he practiced, they said he was a blacksmith. But blacksmithing is code for alchemy. Anytime you encounter someone in the medieval times that are talking about blacksmithing, 9 times out of 10, they're connected with this alchemical stuff. And he was. And we know that he was subject to visions because he claimed that in these chambers at night, he would be visited nightly by the devil. He would have to lead out by his blacksmith tongs, by his nose, and he walked him around and showed all the people in town. He was a crazy guy. But in a book attributed to him, it says, the angelic stone provides exceptional temporal and geographical vision and an ability to understand the language of animals. Also, he shall be endued with divine gifts and foreknowledge of things by dreams and revelations. It is the food of angels. This language is going to feed all the way into the Royal Society, which is where this stuff really blows up. But we can already see that he's associating it with angels, he's associating it with visions, he's associating it with things like understanding the language of animals. The language of the birds is, again, that's an alchemical code. They call it the green tongue. But he claims to know this, and he claims to get it from this angelical food. Comes in with the tongs, Satan. And here is, again, Dee trying to see something in the stone, and Kelly doing something with some alchemical stuff behind him. Now, Edward Kelly eventually became the court alchemist for Rudolf II in Prague. And he claimed to Rudolf that he could transmute base metals into gold, and he said, okay, do it. And he was like, I don't mean that as a metaphor. He's like, nope, I'm locked in this room, do it. And he couldn't do it. And there's conflicting stories, but one of the most famous is that he jumped from this tower, broke his leg, and eventually died, got put back in that room and died. But he was replaced by this man, Heinrich Kunrath, who we mentioned earlier, that quoted Maria Prophetissima on those red gum and white gum. And we'll put this up again, just to refresh your memory. The red gum is the resin of the wise. Now, he was hired by Rudolf to replace Kelly. So he knew Kelly. He studied under Kelly. He specifically went and lived with Kelly before Kelly got locked up. So he knows what he's talking about. Now this brings us to Elias Ashmole and the Royal Society, which is where it really beefs up. And this is how it gets into Freemasonry. This is why we're in this room here, because Freemasons knew about this long before Stefan Zara had shot himself up with DMT in '56, long before Strassman was testing this on subjects in New Mexico. These guys were doing it. Ashmole was an antiquarian. He's responsible for creating the first public museum. We wouldn't have museums without Ashmole. And he was obsessed with alchemy. He published 2 alchemical texts, one called Fasciculus Chemicus, and the other was called Theatrum Chemicum Britannicum. Both of them were collections of alchemical poems from other people. He didn't write them. He learned alchemy from a man named William Backhouse. This is Backhouse's family coat of arms. Backhouse, his father, was a student of Kelly. And it's this man, who turns Ashmole onto it. Now, Elias Ashmole, he is one of the most kind of underrated superpowers of this era. He was probably the smartest man alive next to Newton. Yeah, so this is his coat of arms, which the motto, "No to hide." I think that's pretty interesting. Fasciculus Chemicus. So that's the first document he puts out. It's actually written by Arthur Dee. Remember we said that they swapped wives. When they did, Kelly got Dee's new 16-year-old wife pregnant. And that was Arthur. Arthur became an alchemist in his own right. He claimed to have been present at one of Kelly's transmutations. And he put it in this book. And that's why Ashmole was so interested in publishing it, because of the direct connection to Kelly. Later, he publishes Theatrum Chemicum Britannicum, which became the most famous alchemical manuscript of the time. And in it, in the prologue, he says, "The angelical stone," remember that's what Dunstan called it, "the angelical stone affords apparition of angels." You see angels when you have it. "And gives a power of conversing with them by dreams and revelations, nor dare any evil spirit approach the place where it lodgeth." So he's saying it causes dreams and revelations and the appearance of angels. As you all know, the most common report of people who get a good dose of DMT is encounter with these entities. You know, we might call them aliens, entities, but at this time, this is the language they had. This is how they could discuss it, and they thought they were dealing with angelic entities. This is a picture of Kelly's alchemical lab in Prague. It was discovered still in perfect condition, locked away with a false door over it. And it's part of the museum now. You can go walk through it. And I've written to them a couple of times. I'm trying to get them to test the powder, and they've never tested it. It's right there. So one of the poems in Theatrum Chemicum Britannicum is called Sir Edward Kelly's Work. And Kelly wrote this poem. He says, "All you that fine philosophers would be, and night and day in Jaber's kitchen royal," Jaber was an Islamic alchemist, "wasting the chips of ancient Hermes' tree, weaning to turn to a precious oil. The more you work, the more you lose and spoil. To you I say, how learned soever you be, go burn your books and come learn from me." And that arrogance got him in trouble. But along comes Robert Boyle, the first chemist, arguably the first chemist, founder of the Royal Society, most famous for Boyle's Law, which is used to this day when working with gases. Ashmole comes to him and he says, "Look, I found out about this red powder. I inherited these manuscripts. I've been trying to work it." He says, "I can't make it work because we don't have this red powder." And I think that would be the perfect thing for this new Royal Society to study that you're creating. And Boyle says, "Well, that's interesting because I am also researching this red powder that was made by this alchemist named Wenzel Saylor. This was a red plaque that was made that Saylor allegedly transmuted into gold. But Saylor he's trying to get a hold of the same red powder. And he finds out that a man named St. George Ash writes him, and he says, "Well, this powder that you're looking for from Wenzel Saylor, he's telling you that he got it from this monk, but it's not true. He actually got it when he was in Prague, and he met Edward Kelly there, and Kelly gave him this powder." So he tells Ashmole this, and they're both floored that they're looking for the same powder, this red powder from Edward Kelly. Well, Boyle writes, this is what he says about it. He's very confused about how a powder could do this, but he's interested. He says, "It seems incredible that a little powder that is as corporal as powder of brick should be able to attract incorporeal and intelligent beings that have neither need for nor use of gold, and to converse with those who have made themselves possessors of a few ounces of transmutating powder. For what affinity can there be betwixt the inanimate elixir and a rational and immortal spirit that these angels should delight to hover about it? How can something physical cause you to see something that's not physical, and why the hell would they care? And this is when he released something called Boyle's To-Do List. This was put on display at the Royal Society in 2010. You can still go look at it on their website. And it's a list of items he wants to acquire for this new society to study. Among them are potent drugs to alter or exalt imagination, drugs to procure innocent sleep and harmless dreams, stimulating drugs, drugs that cause pleasing dreams, and as exemplified by the Egyptian, and I cut that off early, I should say Egyptian electuary. Egyptian electuaries were like Dawah Mess or Majuni, these very sweet cannabis confections. So he's saying, I want some hash. Then he says, and by the fungus mentioned by the French author. He wants magic mushroom. The French author he's talking about is a French alchemist named Rabelais, who discusses, he's talking about Paracelsus, but he's talking about a fungus, a mushroom, that he's comparing it to another mushroom he calls manna. And that's what he's saying. He says, whatever that mushroom is, I want it. Drugs that cause great strength, exemplified by frantic, epileptic, and hysterical persons. Epilepsy has always been associated with visions of spiritual things. The Greeks called it the sacred disease for this reason. One of the most common traits among indigenous communities is what we would call these kind of things, epileptic problems among shamans, natural healers. When you're observed as a child having a seizure in many indigenous communities, that's an indication that you're already in touch with these spirits. I love how stoned he looks. Robert Hooke, this is one of the most famous chemists. He was the curator of experiments at the Royal Society. One of his best friends was a sea captain named Robert Knox. And Robert Knox was involved with these tea trading companies. And he would pick up hashish and bring hashish back for Robert Hooke to try. On 2 different occasions, Hooke gave lectures to the Royal Society on the physiological and psychological effects of hashish. Here's some of his comments. It is a certain plant called ganja. The dose of it is about as much as may fill a common tobacco pipe, the leaves and seeds being dried first and pretty finely powdered. It taketh away the memory and understanding, so that the patient understands not nor remembereth anything that he seeth, heareth, or doth in that ecstasy. After a little time he falls asleep, and sleepeth very soundly and quietly, and when he wakes he finds himself mightily refreshed and exceedingly hungry. It's literally the first case of the munchies. Now, in addition to this stuff, one of the things that the Royal Society was also already fascinated with and really interested in was cartography, a good map. It didn't exist back then, a map that accurately reflected the world. One of the maps that came to their attention, that got close, was Christopher Columbus's map. This is Columbus's map. They had Columbus's, all of his reports from his trips to the Americas. This is how we get to the acacia. Columbus was the first person to document the use of something called yopo, or apina, which is a hallucinogenic DMT snuff prepared from 2 different trees, an Adenanthera colubrina and an Adenanthera peregrina. These aren't acacias, but if you saw them, you wouldn't know that. They look almost identical to acacia. And they thought so too, so much so that they actually named it Acacia neopo. Neopo. Yopo is the name. Avon Humboldt, when he visited the area and observed the Maypure Indians using the same snuff, he called the tree Acacia neopo. And when Columbus described this, he described it as a reddish powder that they were blowing up one another's nostrils. This was when their bells went off. They said, we got to get that. We need that powder in addition to the hash and mushrooms we're already looking for. Let's get that. And here's a picture of how they prepare it. They take the seeds, and the seeds, they clump up together, they roast them, and then they peel the shell off, and they press them together with calcium carbonate that's created by calcinating shells from crustaceans. Without that, it's not absorbable by the mucous membranes. It won't work. This in itself is an alchemy, is a science. But this is the powder that they were using. You can see how red it gets. And this is a peregrina, an internet there, a peregrina. The last time I gave this talk, I said, call you Grina, and Luna stood up. He said, no, it's peregrina. So this is peregrina. Here's a picture that was taken by Schultes, one of my heroes, blowing this up each other's nostrils. They would use these sticks. This is a long one. They're usually not that long. They're usually about a foot long. But it's extremely painful. I don't know if any of you have encountered this, Dr. Pan, I'm sure you have. So, one of the men who is in this scramble to find drugs in the Royal Society is this guy, John Theophilus de Saint-Houllier. He's the research assistant to Sir Isaac Newton in the Royal Society. Incidentally, he gets elected the third Grand Master of the Premier Grand Lodge in London. Now, before his stint in Masonry, there was no mention of acacia. It showed up nowhere. The only plant that was mentioned was cassia. Now, cassia in itself is connected to acacia by different etymologies in different regions, but that's not what they were talking about. They were talking about Cassia cinnamonum from southern China. It's like cinnamon. But that's it, and they were referencing that because the degree is about death. And this is one of the herbs that was used and mentioned in the Bible for the preparation of the deceased. And the Egyptians would also use it in their processes of mummification. So the reason it was in there was for death symbolism. He came along and he changed it. Once he got in position of Grand Master, he rewrote the Master Mason degree completely, and he inserted this acacia into it. And at that time, they're actually using it. We'll see actual cases where they're using it, how they're using it. Today, the symbol is still there. When in the third grade, their ritual, you're made to represent a figure named Hiram Abiff, who is like Osiris. You're murdered and you're resurrected. But when you're murdered, at the head of your grave is placed a sprig of acacia to mark that spot. And when these people come along in the ritual searching for the dead body, they find that sprig of acacia and they pull it and they say, well, this is strange. It has no root. That must signify something. They literally say that in a degree. It has no roots. It must signify something. He put that there. This is a picture of the first time we saw this. After he rewrote the degrees, there was a huge parade. And they took the tracing boards and paraded them through the streets. Over here, I haven't gotten to look at it. We'll take a second. These is where they keep their tracing boards. And this is an entered apprentice tracing board. That's the first degree. This represents the ladder decline initiation. So this is a Master Mason tracing board. This represents the symbols of the degree, and the worshipful master would have a baton, and he would point at different symbols on here and explaining exactly what it's gone through in this degree. But you can see at the top is a sprig of acacia. We still have this. It's still here today. And they were so impressed with what he did by including this that they had a parade and walked them through the streets. This is the end of it, because the first two tracing boards with the first and second degree preceded it. But that's it. You can see the sprig of acacia at the top of it. That's the first time in history we get a glimpse of this tradition emerging. And here's some other examples, different versions of tracing boards. This one's interesting because it's been plucked and now it's no longer at the head. But they appear in all different ways. You see here there's a body in there. This one, you see how the dirt is piled up around you, like you're in a hole. I'm sure you're all familiar with that DMT feeling, like you're under something, a membrane. Okay, now, if it wasn't for this man, all that I'm talking about could be argued this is conjecture. You got no proof they were using it. Sure, it's got a drug in it, but how do you know they were using it? This guy, he's more arrogant than Kelly. And he's ready to tell you how much he knows. Alessandro di Cagliostro. Alessandro, he called himself Count. He wasn't a count. He was Italian. And he claimed to have learned Egyptian masonry from Egyptian priests. That's not true. He actually bought a book from a bookseller named George Coston. That book was called The Crata Rapoa. If you're familiar with the Masonic author Manly P. Hall, he published a version of it called The Egyptian Initiation or something like that. But it's a 7-degree system of what purports to be Egyptian masonry. In that, they have a drink, this thing they drink in the final degree called oimelas. We don't know what oimelas is. The etymology of it suggests that it's probably a combination of wine and honey. Oi for oinos and melas means honey. This is a picture of the Crata Rapoa. It was written by a man named Friedrich von Kappen. Von Kappen created the first form of Egyptian masonry. It was called the Afrikanische Bauherren, which means African builders or the African architects. And his system differed from standard masonry of the day in that he had a separate system of initiations for women. This is part of this tradition. We saw that Zosimos was initiated by a woman. There is no problem in this lineage with mixing men and women. They see that actually as preferable. But it's worth noting that they were never initiated together. He really insisted on keeping them apart, but not excluding them. And so he hired a man named Philip Lutherberg to make tracing boards, like we see over here. He said, well, I need tracing boards for my Egyptian system. So Lutherberg painted in these pictures. These aren't the tracing boards, but these are like the proto-tracing boards. He says, what do you think about these? And what we see is a progressive approach of this female approaching this city of light and has to pass through all these terrors and this smoke until finally she is enlightened, meets the light. Cagliostro says, I love it. I'll give you some instructions, go make me some more. And he does. And those instructions are how we know what the degrees look like. And in the first degree, this is the tracing board. Now this is all the time. And he's leading the candidate into a cave. Now at this point, there is a separate anteroom in the lodge where the candidate is led in, and he's told, this is this cave you're going into. And what they go into, we do this to this day. It's a chamber of reflection. Once you get in there, it looks like this. There's always human remains, real human remains. There's always, alchemical elements, salt, sulfur, mercury. There's usually a crust of bread. Vitriol here, which is an acronym, means visita interiore rectificando in Venus occultum lapidem. Visit the interior parts of the earth, and by rectification thou shalt find the hidden stone. He's in the secret parts of the earth right now. That's what that cave represents. When he comes out, this is the speech he hears. The acacia is the primal matter. Primal matter is an alchemical term. It means first matter. This is what you start with. Before you get the end result, you got to find that thing. The acacia is the primal matter. And when the rough ashlar or mercurial part has been purified, it becomes cubical. This is alchemical language. See these over here, these ashlars, these stone squares. One's rough and one's perfect. The rough represents the impure state. The perfect represents the perfect cubical crystal that you get when you do it right. But he's saying, it's been purified, it becomes cubical, like that. It is thus that you may bring about the marriage of the sun and the moon. Remember we saw that over Theosavia and Zosimus' head. How they represent the sun and the moon in this process. And you shall obtain the perfect projection. Quantum sufficit et quantum appetit. Now, this is a Latin phrase that is used to this day in pharmacies. It was used back then in apothecaries. when dispensing drugs. It literally means take as much as you want and as much as you have appetite for. After this, the candidate is fumigated with an incense of this stone from acacia. And he tells him this represents innocence. Innocence is in Freemasonry is a cue, it's a clue to acacia, because they say acacia means innocence. It doesn't, it means thorn. But they get a false etymology from it by saying akakios, not bad, not evil, akakos. So he's saying acacia, this is making you innocent, starting you over. But he warns that you're going to have to, once you go through this fumigation, you're going to see that it's full of demons. And this is the point at which the candidate starts hallucinating. Now this is a picture it's a drawing from a lodge of Egyptian masonry. It's called Memphis Mizraim, where they still use these fumigations and usually have an alchemy lab in the lodge. But you can see how much smoke, the amount of smoke it's not like we burn incense today. It chokes you the way they do it. Now this is a depiction of the drinking of what's called the bitter cup. This still exists in the French Rite. Of course, it's no longer acacia, but the symbol is still there. So he says, the candidate shall drink the red liqueur placed upon the master's altar, thereby raising his spirit in order to understand the following speech, which the worshipful master shall address to him at the same time. Keep in mind, this is the 18th century, the 1720s. If you were going to say this is going to expand your consciousness, how do you think you'd have said it? Something like that? Raise your spirit in order to understand what I'm about to say. Now this is the tracing board for the next degree, and it shows him slaying Mercury in the same way that Hiram is slain. And he collects the fluid, the blood, and he tells him, this is what you're drinking, this blood. My child, you are receiving the primal matter. Learn that the great God created before man this primal matter. Now by saying that, he's equating it with Eden, the tree of life. Created this primal matter. And that he created man to possess it and be immortal. Man abused it and lost it, but it still exists in the hands of the elect of God. And from a single grain of this precious matter becomes a projection into infinity. Now, grain is a medical term, like a grain of morphine, a grain of heroin, roughly 60 milligrams. A good dose of DMT. The acacia which has been given to you at the degree of Master of Ordinary Masonry is nothing but that precious matter. And Hiram's assassination is the loss of the liquid which you have just received. He's saying that this is the blood of Hiram. In modern alchemical circles that still practice this, they call it the blood of Christ. So when Cagliostro, he was eventually arrested by the Inquisition, tortured, killed. In his possession when he was arrested was this book, Lettres Sainte Trina Sophie. Manly P. Hall issued this and wrongfully attributed it to Saint Germain. It's not by Saint Germain, it's by Cagliostro, and you're going to see that for certain here in a moment. So this is from the book. This is that same bird we saw in the acacia tree, that hoopoe with the thorn-like beak, and he's holding an acacia. We know it's an acacia because of the bipenny compound leaf structure. And he's indicating that it's burning. He's going to burn it over this fire, just like we saw with the fumigation before the second degree in Cagliostro's system. This is indicative of the preparation of the work. If you've ever done it, you've seen how the layers separate and how the red ends up floating on top. This is showing the sediment and everything separating. Everything in alchemy is symbolic on multiple levels. You can't ever take it at face value. In the same section where this bird appears, also appears this cup. Remember, it said a shining cup of red liqueur. The same thing appears in this manuscript. It says, he handed me in a crystal cup a shining liqueur of saffron hue. Its taste was delicious, and it emitted an exquisite aroma. I was about to hand the cup back to him after moistening my lips in the liquor, when the old man said, "Drink it all. It will be thy only nourishment during thy journeys." I obeyed and felt a divine fire course through all the fibers of my body. I was stronger, braver. Even my intellectual powers seemed doubled. That's how I feel, I think. So this is the final motion, the last thing the candidate goes through. He brings them to this room, which he calls a tabernacle, of all places. And in there, the candidate is told to go and kneel before the incense, and that he's going to encounter 7 angels, one by one, and they're going to tell him something. And when you come out, Cagliostro would quiz them to find out if they actually had this experience. This is the final tracing. About it, he says, this is the question and answer series he gives them. What does the tracing board represent? Answer, a phoenix being consumed in the middle of a blazing pyre, a sword and the staff of Mercury, time with wings, a master mason elect of God, an upturned hourglass, and the broken scythe of time. All of this is symbolic for his description, how he's describing the experience, transcending time. What is the meaning of the phoenix? Answer, that a true mason may rise from the ashes, that he can renew himself, be rejuvenated at will like that bird, and that it is with this certitude that one can say, et renovatur plumas meas, my feathers grow back, like the phoenix. And they're acknowledging that what happens on this is a death and a rebirth. What is signified by time in the master mason who is clipping his wings? Answer, that when a good mason succeeds in clipping the wings of time, his life no longer has a fixed term. What is meant by the broken scythe? Answer, that for a man who is immortal, the measurement of time becomes pointless. What were you taught in the interior of the temple? Answer, the most sublime knowledge. Question, what does that consist? Answer, after I had received a portion of the power which God desired to grant the grand copt of our founder, Cagliostro, I was taught the means of regenerating degenerate man. Now this brings us to the end of my talk. This notion of regeneration is what he's talking about, rebirth, regeneration. What he learns, what he teaches them after this, is something that he reserved only for his most advanced adepti. And it was this retreat for regeneration. In it, he would make them build a small cabin, a little hut out in the middle of nowhere. And they would have to close themselves up in this for days at a time while taking varying amounts of this philosopher's stone until something happened, the result happened. This is from the same book showing the process, and these are all Masonic symbols. This MB, you see, it's written in a cipher language there, but MB is also on the tracing board there. In it, he says, now this is the retreat. This is the secret he told them of how to regenerate people. The candidate will shut themselves up in a house in the countryside. He will take a grain, 60 milligrams, of materia prima. Now remember, from his ritual, we know that the materia prima is acacia, not the stone produced from it. He's giving them just acacia first. On first waking, he will absorb his first grain of universal medicine. Now that's what he calls the stone. He will repeat this the following days. After an unconsciousness of 3 hours, then convulsions, perspirations, inconsiderable evacuations, he will change the bedroom. Now remember, it's a purgant. They even call it la purga in certain areas in South America. He's purging, and he's doing it pretty heavily. The following day, he takes the second grain of universal medicine. A deep sleep will follow. The hair, teeth, the nails, and skin will blacken, fall off, and be renewed. The 40th day, he will return home regenerated and perfectly recreated. This sounds like nothing so much as shamanic dismemberment. The motif of being taken apart, put back together, reassembled in a new, perfect, magical way. This is a depiction of shamanic dismemberment, how it's described by certain Tungus shaman in Siberia. Now here we see, this is from Michael Myers' Atalanta Fugens. In the text next to it, he describes this king as Osiris being put in his coffin, and we can see in the background, he's being dismembered. These are the different stages of the same scene. And again, this renewal, taking apart, clean you, put you back together as a new creature. Here it is again, the dismemberment plus, instead of the golden phallus, we have a golden head, but it's still symbolic of that generative thing that has to be saved, that has to be taken from, it's in the water. It's resurrected from water, but it's the head he needs. It's the essence. And you can see the similarity in these images. This same image shows up in Zosimus. That's where they're getting it. Now, the best description, explanation of what is happening with shamanic dismemberment that I've ever encountered is from an amazing scholar named Jeremy Nagel, who wrote a book called Temple of the Cosmos, the Ancient Egyptian Experience of the Sacred. In it, he says, in the process of initiation, the overall experience of unitary self-consciousness was broken down altogether in order to rebuild it more strongly. The important initiatory idea of dismemberment becomes comprehensible when it is seen as the only way of describing the experience of catastrophic psychic fragmentation. The mutilation of the body undergone by Osiris was the prototype of this psychic fragmentation that must have been experienced by the initiate in a psychophysical way. This psychic fragmentation was precipitated as a prelude to the initiate's re-identifying with a new psychic center that transcended the distributed psyche. By distributed psyche, he's referring to the Egyptian tendency to say things like, my will is in my breast, but my thoughts are in my belly. Things weren't localized as a unit. They were very much spread about. The healing of the limbs, the restoration of the members of the dismembered body, is a theme that runs through the sacred literature of ancient Egypt. It was the climax of the Osirian initiation, which involved the experience of dismemberment. This was the final rite of passage. And that's what we're seeing with that retreat, the same dismemberment motif that goes all the way back to Osiris, back to the Zosimus teaching. Now, this brings us to the final point of this talk. If there was any suspicion that this wasn't a drug, if you have any doubt that we're talking about drugs, this will lay that to rest, I promise. There are a group of theosophists, and by theosophists I don't mean Blavatsky, I mean followers of Jacob Boehme, that came from Europe and came to live in Pennsylvania and what's now called the Ephrata community. The man who set this up, that after the first man died that brought them here, Kelpius takes over, and he lived in this little cave where he had an alchemy lab. He was very reclusive. Nobody knows a whole lot about what he was doing in there. But one day, an alchemist came to live with them, and he brought with him his lab, and he brought with him one of the texts he had, was that retreat, Cagliostro's retreat for regeneration. Later, they have a second man show up. His name is Johann Regnier. Now, Regnier, he's not an alchemist. He doesn't really know shit from Shinola. But he says, I've heard about this retreat, and I intend to do it. And they tell him, you can't. You haven't been here long enough. you haven't been through the initiation rituals. If you did this, you would probably die. And he says, well, I don't care. I already have the manuscript and to do it anyway. So he goes out in the woods. He clears him a space. He builds his little hut. And this is what happens. He says, I subjected myself in my cabin to all the rules and requirements of the ritual, even more strictly than they had been communicated to me. This went on without my attaining anything of that which I sought, until I at last lost my reason and became delirious. When I was completely mad and without reason, they took me from the hut, demolished it, and confined me in a cell, guarding me day and night. But as they could not accomplish anything, they removed me to a dark cell and beat and lashed me so that I might recover my reason. As all proved for naught and I only became worse, they removed me to another place, then again to another, where I had more liberty, after which I became sane, however, not without many relapses or flashbacks. Although my reason had been entirely gone, everything remained in my memory, and I can readily recall all so long as nothing else crosses my mind. Thus I recovered and came gradually to my sound senses, but whenever my will was opposed, the turba and confusion again reappeared. That brings me to the end of my talk. Thank you all for listening.
Quite often in alchemical writings, the philosopher's stone is metaphorically described as the union of the sacred masculine and the divine feminine to create the divine eunuch.
Mm-hmm.
How does that metaphor fit into Acacia being the philosopher's stone?
They're marrying gums, and that's even the language she uses, married gum with gum. So she very much sees those, Maria sees those as opposites. By the time we get to Zosimus, he becomes the sun, and his female student becomes the moon. And it's been suggested that there was probably an element of sexuality to this relationship. We don't have proof of that, but the marriage component was still very much there. But as far as, like when we think about modern use of DMT, we marry it with an MAOI. They might not have been thinking that way. Some of the acacias that we have access to now, we don't need the MAOI. It has, there are flavonoids in there that act as beta-carbolines that can work as MAOIs. And I think what they're using meets that criteria, because we don't see anything about Pagana Hormala, the addition of something that would be monomonostasis. But we still see that marriage component. It's in their relationship, in the gums, the red with the white. Yeah, I think it's still present.
So in Western history traditions, I think they talk about stone being the crystallizing of the aura or body, in regards to it being acacia. In regards to it being acacia, yeah, do you think that's in line with that? In opposition to that idea, or maybe they exist on top of each other? How would you relate this? Because they're two sort of, in magic, it's so in ceremonial magic, they relate the vitriol, the stone, the vitriol axiom, to being that point at death where you crystallize the aura and you jump off the wheel, so to speak, when they reincarnate. It's a metaphysical thing. Mm-hmm. I guess I want to know how you think that relates to the very physical thing of being acacia, being a substance, and is it opposed to in line with, do they sit on top of each other?
Yeah, because once it's applied, it's no longer just a physical substance, it's a metaphysical experience. We talk about crystallizing the aura. What we're talking about is geometry, right? We're talking about physically seeing this thing that isn't necessarily physical. And we saw that when he talked about using the stone to attain sight. If you look at in the Greek magical papyri, they use acacia for medicine, but they say it's It's not for eye problems, it's to give you better sight, to see things you can't see. And so I think, even though it's a physical substance, it's not finished being made until you put it in a bottle. That's the final step. How to apply it. That's part of the mystery. The alchemist, even if they had the stone, how do I apply it? What do I do with it? You know, to take that extra step and burn it and inhale it, or to consume it, that's the final step. And that's what part of that red represents. Red, as the final step, while it does redden, it has to do with the redness of blood, with combining it with yourself. Becoming red is also a symbol of unity. Just like a sacrament, that's right.
I'd just like to hear your thoughts about, in Zechariah's section in his interpretation of the ancient Sumerian texts, identifies as mufkut as being white powdered gold, which is a monatomic substance which apparently has the possibility of shifting between dimensions when it's heated, and that the fallen angels he identifies with a group called the Anunnaki, who used it to activate their pineal gland and to vivify their light body. I'm just wondering, do you find that has any kind of like significance within the kind of context within which you talk about it? They did find this white powdered gold in the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid, but also in other temples, one particularly in Sinai, where Moses was purported to go up to Mount Sinai and I also am very much in the idea that Moses was imbibing the acacia bush, because I've met Ben Hashan and had long chats with him, and it seemed very plausible. But I just wondered what you thought about that body of information that Sitchin puts forward in a context within which you presented this.
That's a good question, and I get this question a lot, because many people who know about alchemy find themselves in the monatomic gold territory. But they're very different things. And the monatomic gold, the first time we get it as a phenomenon, when we see it before it was found, because was it tested in the pyramids? I remember when they found the white powder, did they test it?
Well, I'm not familiar with that, but there was a guy, a farmer in
David Hudson.
who did various experiments and did very,
He is, to my knowledge, where it starts. We don't really have people coming up with that powder and saying, this is monatomic gold, until David Hudson. And he really saw that as the answer. I'm skeptical. I think with all of the descriptions we see of alchemy, especially in these early days, the experience should look something like an out-of-body experience, like freeing the soul from matter. When I was in my 20s, I mean, over several years, I probably consumed a pound of monatomic gold. And I don't know that it did anything for me. Maybe I'm not enlightened enough for it to work, but it didn't do anything to me. So I think there are two different domains that's using the same language, because they're both attempts to solve the same problem. Thank you.
Yeah, there's obviously a long and old link with alchemy and statues, and the creation of statues that create colours and stuff like that for statue. Tincturing, yeah, exactly. And then we have this later sort of tradition of the animation of statues, which this whole Neoplatonic tradition with Theurgy and stuff along those lines. Do you think the animation itself of these statues would be linked to a psychedelic experience, perhaps?
Yes, absolutely. So we talked about Hecate. We showed that Hecate statue that Proclus was famous for animating. If we look in the Chaldean oracles, the very last fragment in there, I think it's fragment 224, is an instruction on animating a Hecate statue. Yeah. You know what it says to make the statue out of? Pagan Harmon. Right off that, you're making it with Harmon. And then they're anointing it with crushed lizards. Now, we don't have psychedelic lizards that we know of outside of the ones that have the catherinum in them, like the same thing the beetles have. Yeah. But if there's, okay, so there's something called a mithratea. Mithridates was this king who was obsessed with elixirs of immortality. And he had all of these things that he would put in them that were secretive. They found a list of those things, what it is. And one of them, it was opium, lizards, and something he called savage rue. Now, savage rue is pagan law, Syrian rue. And Pliny the Elder, in his natural history, he says there are two rues. There's one that we call ruta graviolens, that's the rue, the common rue that's used like in the Catholic Church. And then there's Syrian rue, which he says is wild or savage rue. And he says this stuff, if you take too much of it, it'll kill you. And he's described pagan law. And that's what they're making Hecate statues out of, with lizards on them, just like they found in the recipe. Now, the Eleusinian mysteries, they're, since Carl Ruck and Hoffman and Watson's book, Road to Eleusis, they're associated with ergot. And we don't know that they were. They found a temple in Italy, a temple to Persephone and to Demeter, where they had dolias, which are these wine fats, and they tested the residue, and it had ergot in it. And then they found a skeleton that had ergot in his dental calculus. So we know that that was right.
Yep.
Alongside that, they found a vat that had frogs, lizards, opium, and savage rue in it, pagan Ramadan. So this statue animation is wrapped up with hallucinogens. And it's also, Hecate says, if you build my statue and you complete it, and for completion she uses telete, which is the word for initiation. But she says, if you initiate my statue under a waning moon, then she says, then I'll take the next step. So you do the first thing, and then she says, then I'll start coming to you in dreams and visions. So you might not see the statue move, but once you're unconscious, it will move in front of you. That's what she says she'll do. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, very much.
Fantastic.
Do you know?
I'll come next.
Do you know if Maria Prophetissima has any link with Maria Magdalene of Gnosticism?
That's a great question. One thing I'm just now learning about is that Magdalene came from an area that's famous for dyes. And there are acacia groves in her country, and they use these acacia to dye textiles. So Magdalene is from a tradition that is directly associated with acacias. I just learned this, so once I know more, I'll write something about it, but it's a pretty solid connection.
And I see a lot of connections with Gnosticism.
That's right, for Turkish rugs, that's right.
On
Turkish red, they call it. Mm-hmm.
Like what you were talking before, I see a lot of connections in the Gnosticism system,
Mm-hmm.
or depends which you look at.
Well, the Gnostics, particularly the Sethian Gnostics, they wouldn't exist without Neoplatonism. They were going to Plotinus' school and listening to him. And Porphyry's Life of Plotinus, he talks about all these Gnostic texts that were circulating. We only knew those names from his reference to them until 1945 when they found the Nag Hammadi cache. There they were. They exist, the real texts. But we wouldn't have that without them hanging out with Plotinus, who he's the first guy to give instructions on statue animation in his Enneads. He says, you want to do the sun, then you need to take gold, you need to take a plant that's solar, you need to take animals that are solar, and you combine them in a way that he calls it a galma. And that's, again, directly associated with this psychedelic stuff.
Brandon Newman. And first, I want to congratulate you on your wonderful research. Very great work. Thank you. And I would like to ask you, how does your fellow brethren feel about this, about your work, and you bringing up to life what our older brethren were up to? Because here we don't know much about this. Do you see this is coming back? Thank you.
Thank you. Where I live, they do not appreciate that. I get shit every time I go to lodge. But I can really only attend lodge comfortably when I go to places like this, when I'm invited to come speak. But in my lodge, you're not allowed to write anything down. They say that you're writing down the secrets. Well, officially, the secrets refer to, there are secrets and there are mysteries in masonry. Mysteries are ineffable. I couldn't communicate them to you if I wanted to, because if you don't have a frame of reference for it, it's just words. But the secrets just refers to modes of recognition, the handshakes, the steps, the grips, the passwords. I don't communicate any of that stuff. So I'm not breaking any rules, but they don't see it that way. So I don't get much recognition there. But everywhere I've gone to talk about this, I've had a positive reception. With the one exception of, I've spoken at Pythagoras Lodge in Atlanta, and this ancient librarian and he got up in the middle of my talk and he said, y'all don't believe nothing this boy's telling you. I let him have the floor, but everywhere else it's been pretty positive. But that being said, I'm not convinced there aren't high Masons that know about this. Now, there are only 33 degrees, and I've exposed 2 different 33-degree Masons to this substance, and it was clearly their first time. So it's not like everybody just knows once they get to a certain point. But I have a suspicion that someone has to know, mainly because, like we talked about earlier, Rick Strassman, he tested DMT on human subjects in New Mexico. We paid for that. It was a grant from the Scottish Rite that allowed that to happen. Why do they want that?
In Australia, the present moment, and this type of conversations is like the chemical side of esoteric side of Freemasonry is kind of being pushed to the side. You see that coming back because
I do. It's been a supper club for a long time, and part of it is by design. But there are people all over the world, Masons all over the world, that are re-implementing these practices. And I hear nothing but like miraculous feedback. Now, in my opinion, a room full of Masons tripping on DMT is the most bad idea. But apparently in some places it works. And it is coming back. A lot of these hidden wisdoms, these esoteric wisdoms, this is the time when I think we should be able to discuss these things like adults.
Have you been in contact with Timothy Hogan?
Say it again?
Timothy Hogan?
Oh, I know Tim. Yeah. His book, Alchemical Keys to Freemasonry, it's when I read that I said I would publish. Because he gets so close. He's described, if y'all that don't know Timothy Hogan, he wrote this book, and in Masonry, we have penalties. When we take the obligation to be a Mason, we invite terrible things on ourselves if we violate it. He looked at those and realized that these penalties are symbols. And if you look at them this way, they are alchemical processes that have to do with distillation, calcination. But he didn't get that if he did these things to the only plant mentioned in the degree, guess what you get? The Philosopher's Stone. He missed that point. So I had no intentions of publishing until I read his book, which I think is wrong. A lot of it's wrong, but that was a huge step forward in being able to look at the degrees like that.
Would you have a similar thought process with the other plants mentioned, like wheat and oil?
Well, the other plants are, so we have the corn, wine, and oil.
Yeah.
Are the wages of the fellowcraft. But corn is misleading. Corn doesn't refer, the reason they call it, corn is maize. They call the kernels corns because they are salt corns when we make corned beef hash. So corn is salt. This is alchemical salt, wine, and water. Which is exactly the things you need.
Yes. And
so that's a great question. I should have put that.
Well, with FC, we in Australia refer to wheat, so I was thinking is there a connection further than the wheat? Is that just coincidence?
So in chapter 2 of Alchemical Stone, if you all have got a copy, chapter 2 is all about ergot, because the second degree does discuss placing a sheaf of wheat under running water. And it happens at a threshing floor, which if you've read Road to Eleusis, you know about the threshing floor of Trachonius, where they ceremonially separated the ergot from the barley. The same thing is when this masonry, this room we're in represents King Solomon's temple. King Solomon's temple was built on the threshing floor. on Ornan's threshing floor, where he saw a vision of an angel there. So this threshing floor is directly connected to the buildings of Solomon's temple. And then they talk about, let's pour the water over this wheat. So they're very suggestive. But that's enough in the sun.
Time for one more question, then we'll leave it break. Okay.
I was just super intrigued with what you said a moment ago about the Masons funding Rick Strassman's work. Is that public knowledge? Is there any more you could tell us about?
I'll tell you what I know about it. So, I asked Rick about this, because it's in his forward. It says it was funded by the Northern Masonic Scottish Rite Schizophrenia Research Foundation. And I said, how did this happen? Well, there's a famous LSD researcher named Daniel Zander Freeman. He died in the 90s. But Freeman came to him and he said, look, we're interested in what you're doing. If you'll put in a grant, we'll give you one. So he didn't reach out to them. They reached out to him saying, we want to know about this. Now, they're a schizophrenia research foundation. So their logic behind this, and they didn't say it this way, but it's clearly that they're thinking DMT might have something to do with schizophrenia, right? Endogenous DMT production. This is the earliest, it's called the psychotomimetic model of psychedelics. This is what Humphrey Osmond was talking about when he was trying to find M substance, which was mescaline-like substance, because a mescaline trip resembles schizophrenic episodes to a degree. That whole way of exploring psychedelics was thrown out the window. So if they're going to resurrect it, they owe us a paper to explain why. But that's what I think they're doing, is trying to do it under the guise of resurrecting the psychotomimetic model. But what they're really interested in is DMT and in the endogenous production of it. Because another thing, remember where Strassman claims it came from was the pineal gland. Now, we know that DMT actually shows up in the lungs and the eyeballs. We don't know if it's in the pineal gland or secreted there. It was discovered in the pineal gland of rats at Cottonwood Institute in 2012, I think. But that's precisely where we get smacked when we are killed as this figure in the ritual, between the eyes. Then you're dead. But I think there's knowledge of it, and I think that somebody knows, and maybe they'll tell us. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay guys, 15-minute break. There's sandwiches, there's snacks. You can get some tea and coffee if you want, have a smoke, use the bathroom, whatever you need. We're back here, probably 2:20 we'll kick off.